Hey guys, tonight we slip down a stone stairwell slick with damp and centuries-old dread. Torches flicker against the mossy walls, casting dancing shadows on a heavy iron door that creaks like it remembers every scream. You step through it, careful not to trip on the uneven floor, and there, in the cold, airless gloom of the dungeon, you meet yourself. The torturer. Yep, you. Leather apron, soot-smudged brow, hands like carved oak, and someone chained to the wall waiting for your undivided attention. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing when and where you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't start with a bang. Torture's not about theatrics, it's about control. You don't yell. You don't shout. You speak low and slow, because the quieter you are, the more terrifying it gets. You know this because you've learned the rhythm of pain. How fear crawls up the spine long before a single bone snaps. Your first client is accused of heresy. A weaver's apprentice with a suspicious fondness for books and unauthorised prayer. You check the record, mostly blank, because the local scribe doesn't write fast enough when someone's confessing under duress. You glance at the tools. The pulley, the boot, a bucket of water. You're not here to kill, just to loosen lips. That's the party line. And here's the fun twist. You're not hated because you're evil. You're hated because you're necessary. The local lord needs order. The bishop needs compliance. The townsfolk, they need to believe that the system works. That when the torturer gets involved, something wrong is being righted. Historians still argue whether medieval torture was primarily punitive or performative. Some think it was theatre for the masses, blood-stained proof that authority had teeth. Others see it as bureaucratic, a form of messy paperwork, done with bone saws instead of pens. You don't philosophise. You work. You start by cleaning the room. Torture chambers aren't as grimy as you'd think. Infection ruins the fun. A clean chain is a reusable chain. You wipe down the bench, light 3 fresh candles, and open the window slit for some airflow, not for your client's sake, just to stop your own nausea from settling in too deep. Your training was informal. A mentor, a few nights of hands-on learning, a nudge from someone who owed a favour. There's no guild of torturers, just a revolving door of war veterans, failed blacksmiths, or people like you, good with your hands and bad at saying no. You remember your first mistake vividly. A peasant accused of theft. You went too fast, snapped a wrist too early, and he passed out before naming his co-conspirator. You got scolded, not for hurting him, but for wasting the opportunity. Timing is everything. Pain must climb steadily, like a careful melody, not explode like a tavern brawl. Fringe fact. Some torturers use perfumes during sessions, not to calm the prisoner, but to keep their own stomach from turning. Lavender was popular. You can't smell it anymore without your fingers twitching. Your first client today sobs, insists on innocence. You nod, patient, and begin with the chair. It's not dramatic. You ask questions softly while tightening straps. The worst part for them isn't the pain, it's the anticipation. That moment when leather tightens around skin and you casually mention, this could take hours. Sevens, you take breaks strategically. Let them think. Let them stew. Sometimes, silence works better than screams. You walk over to your desk, shuffle some parchments, sip water, make them feel forgotten. The moment they start yelling, please, I'll talk, you return. Not out of kindness. You're optimizing results. One historical fact. In many parts of Europe, torture required a magistrate's signed permission. But no one checked too hard how far you went. As long as the body was mostly intact and a confession came out the other end, you were golden. You work under a bizarre code of ethics. no breaking major bones, no permanent disfigurement unless ordered, no family members watching, unless that's part of the process. You're a legal loophole wrapped in human form, and no one wants to make eye contact with you in the street. Your client finally cracks, muttering about secret meetings, a pamphlet, a man with odd shoes who said the Pope was a fraud. You write it down neatly. You don't care if it's true. Truth isn't your job. Closure is. The confession is sealed with a thumbprint, yours. The scribe will later claim it's the prisoner's. The page is filed away, and your client is sent back upstairs to await sentencing. You wash your hands slowly, scrubbing beneath each nail. You smell blood, even when there isn't any. It clings to your skin like guilt you pretend not to feel. Sometimes, you wonder if you're the villain. But then the baker nods at you in the market, a silent thanks for keeping his daughter safe from the heretics. And the guards bring you fresh firewood, a little heavier than last week, as if you've earned it. Still, there are nights when you lie awake and hear phantom screams. You tell yourself it's the wind. You almost believe it. Because if you did believe it, if you let those echoes settle too deep, you might start to crack. And nobody tortures the torturer, except himself. You weren't born a torturer. You didn't come screaming into this world already holding a pair of pliers and a dead-eyed stare. No, your life started much like anyone else's in the 13th century, with dirt under your fingernails, a vague awareness of God, and about a 1 in 3 chance of surviving past your 5th birthday. Your father was a tanner, or a gravedigger, maybe a miller who drank too much and shouted more than he worked. The point is, you weren't noble, and no one ever carved your name into anything permanent. You were invisible, which, weirdly, became your superpower. School? Please. You learned to count by lifting sacks and measuring flour. You learned anatomy by skinning rabbits. You learned patience by watching your mother endure things she never complained about. Childhood was less about dreams and more about dodging famine, surviving winters, and praying someone richer didn't decide they needed what little you had. The church didn't save you. The market didn't pay you. But one day, the guard captain noticed something. You were quiet, steady. You didn't flinch at the sight of blood. That got you a job, nothing official, just holding torches, mopping up after executions, and maybe whispering things into ears when asked. He was seen near the abbey last night. They say she speaks to cats. Things that make people squirm. You had a knack for it. And when the old torturer mysteriously retired, which is code for dropped dead in a bucket of his own phlegm, they asked you to step up. You didn't say no. Historians still argue whether torturers were chosen for cruelty, detachment, or simply availability. Some evidence suggests they were often loners with few family ties, people who wouldn't be missed if things went wrong. Others think it was more pragmatic. You were nearby, unemployed, and didn't seem too sentimental. Your training was brief. A week in the cellar with Master Otto, who smelled like boiled cabbage and had fingers like meat hooks. He didn't teach you pain, he taught you control. How to watch. How to wait. How to know when someone was lying, and when they were just desperate. Torture is mostly listening, he used to mutter. The tools just finished the sentence. Sevens. Your first session was with the thief accused of pickpocketing a noble squire. You didn't even touch him. You just sat there, slowly cracking walnuts with a clamp while making eye contact. By the 5th walnut, he confessed to stealing everything from purses to chickens to one very confused goose. You learned quickly. Fear does more heavy lifting than fire ever will. Still, you had to pay your dues. There were nights when you scrubbed blood off stone until your fingers bled. There were mornings when the smell of singed flesh clung to your hair, and no amount of rinsing with lavender water could get rid of it. You lost weight. Or gained it. Depends on how nervous eating hits you. The townsfolk started looking at you differently. Shopkeepers stopped haggling. Kids stopped waving. You were still you, but wrapped in a darker outline. The person they used to know had been replaced with something inconvenient, quirky tidbit. In some towns, torturers had to live outside city walls, literally separated by gates. Not because of what they did, but because people believed their presence invited bad luck or demons. You live in a cottage next to the tannery. Smells like boiled leather and shame, but it's yours. Your first year was clumsy. You broke a man's jaw too early once, making him confess through slurred grunts. Another time, you let a prisoner trick you into untying one hand. He almost stabbed you with a loose nail he'd hidden in his shoe. You've still got the scar, but every mistake taught you something. That pain isn't one size fits all. That screams aren't always honest. That people will say anything if you make them feel like the only way out is through you. And then, something strange happened. You started liking the silence, not the torture. You're not a monster, but the quiet before it starts. That moment where the whole world narrows to just you, your tools, and one terrified soul praying you'll show mercy. That silence made you feel powerful, and power was something you'd never had before. You remember one night especially. You were walking back from a session, cloak pulled tight, rain soaking through your boots. You passed a group of townsfolk, farmers and their wives, heads down, avoiding your eyes. One woman looked up briefly, just for a moment, and the look she gave you wasn't fear. It was relief. Because in her eyes, you were the last wall between order and chaos. As long as you were doing your job, she wouldn't have to. From that night on, you stood straighter, sharpened your blades more carefully, rehearsed your questions in your head like poetry. Because now, this wasn't just a job, it was an identity. And once you become the torturer, there's no going back. The town might forget the baker who overcooked his loaves. They'll forgive the mason who botched a chimney. But the torturer? They never forget the sound of your boots on stone. Your workshop isn't a castle chamber with velvet curtains and lightning flashing outside. It's a cramped stone room with a low ceiling, 2 narrow slits for air, and a thick wooden door with iron bands so heavy it takes your whole body weight to close it. The smell? A sour cocktail of old blood, damp stone, heated metal, and fear sweat baked into the walls. You stop noticing it after a while. Or maybe your nose just gives up. This is where the magic happens. Welcome to your cosy little corner of hell. You've arranged your tools with care. Not for show, this isn't a gallery, but for function. You know what's where without looking. That's important. Because in the heat of the moment, when someone's screaming, you don't want to be fumbling for the boot press like you're looking for a fork in a messy kitchen drawer. Let's take a little tour, shall we? There's the rack, of course, the centrepiece. Long wooden frame, rollers at each end, and ropes wound so tightly they creak if you breathe near them. Not used every day, but always kept oiled and ready. You like to think of it as the grand piano of pain. Elegant, classic, devastating when played well. Then there's the thumb screws. Small, unassuming, almost boring to look at. But you'd be surprised how fast a person starts talking when their knuckles begin cracking like dry twigs. You keep 3 sizes. Child-sized, 2. That's a reality you try not to think about too long. On the wall hang pincers, some standard, some modified. A few are heated over coals. You use those rarely, mostly for show. Fire is dramatic, but messy. The real art is in pressure, tension, and time. There's a table with belts and ropes, a funnel for water torture, a bridle designed to silence, and a metal frame you once customized to keep someone awake for 2 straight days. You called it the cradle. Others called it a bad idea. You all laugh about it now. Sort of historical fact. Many medieval torture chambers doubled as jails or storerooms. Your space? Half used for storing firewood, which leads to the odd moment where a guard bursts in mid-session, asking if he can grab a few logs for the scribe's hearth. Let's not forget the chair. Iron, spiked, and built with unholy patience. You've only used it twice, both times ceremonial, to show the bishop you still have the proper equipment. It's more intimidating than effective. Mostly, it's there to remind people that things could get worse. And then there's your knife set. Surgical, beautiful in a morbid way. Handles worn smooth, blades sharpened so often they've gotten thinner with time. You never stab. That's for amateurs. You scrape. You carve. You threaten. You've only drawn actual blood with them a handful of times. The rest? All show. There's a weird piece to maintaining your tools. You spend hours at the grindstone, cleaning, wrapping handles, replacing worn leather. It's meditative. Your version of prayer. The room's silent except for the soft whetstone hiss and maybe a bird chirping faintly through the high slit in the wall. Quirky tidbit. Some torturers name their tools. You haven't. Not officially. But in your head, you've got nicknames. Old Groaner for the winch. Whistler for the thin leather strap that slices clean. Mother-in-law for the boot press because, well, you like a little humour where you can find it. There's no glamour in this room. No secret passages or velvet masks. Just stone, sweat, and silence. But this room is your cathedral. It's where people face the truth. Sometimes theirs, sometimes yours. Sometimes you just sit on the bench, elbows on your knees, staring at the wall. Thinking. Not about right or wrong. That ship sailed years ago. You think about angles, reactions, thresholds. If someone screams at the second notch, what happens at the fifth? How do you stretch fear without snapping it? Historians still argue whether these torture chambers were used often or mainly kept as psychological tools. Some evidence suggests many of the infamous rooms were rarely used. Prisoners would confess just from the threat of being brought in. Others believe they were in near daily operation, especially in times of heresy and plague-fueled panic. You fall somewhere in between. Most days, you don't even touch your tools. You let the room do the talking. People walk in, eyes wide, taking in the rack, the blades, the blackened coals, and their knees start trembling before you even ask the first question. That's the secret. The best torturer doesn't need to raise a hand. Just an eyebrow. Still, you keep everything spotless. Not because you're neat, but because rot weakens wood, and rust dulls steel. You respect your tools the way a knight respects his sword, or a baker respects his oven. You wouldn't bake a loaf in a dirty kiln. You wouldn't pry a confession out with a dull hook. There's one item you never use, though. It's tucked in the corner, under a cloth. A brank, an iron mask shaped like a snarling beast. Fits over the head, clamps the jaw shut with a metal bit across the tongue. Supposed to stop gossips. The mayor asked you to try it once on a woman who spread rumours about his wife. You refused. Not because you had principles, but because it was stupid. Torture is about function, not spectacle. That mask, it's punishment, not persuasion. And you don't like being used as a prop. People forget that part. They think you enjoy this. That you walk into work each day rubbing your hands together like a cartoon villain. But this isn't a play. It's a craft. And your workshop is the quietest place in town. You don't do this for free. Shocking, right? Your work might reek of moral rot, but it pays, sometimes decently. You're not rich. You're not even comfortable, really. But compared to the average ditch-digging peasant, you're practically living in luxury. You've got coin for meat, the occasional bottle of something strong, and boots that don't fall apart in the rain. That's wealth, in your corner of the world. Your pay comes from the town purse, or sometimes from the accused's confiscated property, once they confess, of course. Funny how their belongings always seem to disappear faster than the ink dries on their statement. It's a corrupt little system, and you're a comfortable gear in it. And yes, you get bonuses. That's the part most people don't realise. For certain types of confessions, for speeding up the process, for no permanent damage, you're sometimes rewarded with extra silver. There was a time you stretched a confession out over 3 days just to time it with a festival and double your payment. Grim? Maybe. But practical. Historical fact. Torturers in the Holy Roman Empire were sometimes paid by result, meaning no confession, no coin. That created a predictable trend. Everyone eventually confessed. Miraculous. Of course, not all perks are monetary. Sometimes you get favours. The baker leaves you an extra loaf. The tanner repairs your belt strap for free. The guard looks the other way when your firewood is a little heavier than regulation. You're feared, yes, but also useful. And in the Middle Ages, being useful is the closest thing to job security you're going to get. Then there are the unofficial perks. Like the house the town lets you stay in, rent-free. It's not much. Low beams, leaky roof, haunted by the screams of your conscience, but it's home. And crucially, it's yours. No one wants to squat in the torturer's spare room. You're not invited to festivals. No one asks you to dance. But once a year, during St. Egbert's feast, you're handed a mug of ale by the mayor himself. He doesn't meet your eyes, but the gesture is there. That's how respect works in your world, quiet and full of dread. Quirky tidbit. In some towns, torturers were granted the right of the leftovers. They could take what was left of a condemned person's property, scraps, clothes, sometimes livestock. You once inherited a goat. It was mean, stubborn, and completely deaf. You named it Bishop. People think you live in shadows, but really, you live in the margins. You're not part of the nobility, not part of the peasantry. You're a function, a necessary evil. And like most necessary evils, you are rarely thanked, but never forgotten. Your routine is simple. Wake up at dawn, splash cold water on your face, sharpen 2 tools even if you won't need them, and check your orders. Some days are quiet. Other days, you're summoned to the keep by a courier who smells like stale cabbage and speaks in half sentences. You know the drill. Someone's accused, the council wants answers, and they want them now. You get there. You listen. You nod. And then you get to work. Most of the time, you finish by dusk. Sometimes sooner. Depends on how cooperative your client is. You keep logs, not for history, but for bureaucracy. You write down what they said, what they gave up, and how long it took. You don't note the screaming. No one wants to read that. Your hands ache more than they used to. Your left knee crunches when you squat. You've burned yourself on hot coals more times than you care to admit. Occupational hazards. And no, there's no insurance. If you get sick, you heal or die. If you get injured, you wrap it and keep going. There's no replacement. No understudy. If you quit, the town's in a panic until they find someone else dark enough to take your place. Historians still argue whether torturers were respected or reviled by their own peers. Some evidence shows they were given honorary roles during public processions. Other accounts describe them being spat on in the market. The truth is probably both. You're feared and respected, loathed and valued. It's a weird, lonely tightrope you've learned to balance on. You try not to think about how long you can do this. There's no retirement plan, no pension, no ceremonial send-off. When you can no longer tighten ropes or lift prisoners, you fade, you vanish. Maybe you become the old one mumbling to pigeons in the churchyard. Maybe you just don't wake up one morning, and no one checks until your cottage starts to smell. You've seen it happen. You're planning for it not to happen to you. You keep a small pouch buried under your floorboards, silver, mostly, with a few gold coins. You call it your parchment fund, as in, when the day comes, you'll buy some ink and forge yourself a new identity. Disappear to a coastal town, become a fisherman, lie about everything. You don't actually fish well, but the dream helps you sleep. Every time you clean your tools, you whisper a little phrase, not a prayer, exactly, but close. Today is not the last. It started as a joke. Now it's habit. You've lasted longer than anyone expected. Maybe longer than you should have. But hey, the perks aren't bad. And the job? The job needs you. There's an art to it, really. Torture isn't just pain, it's a rhythm. A performance with precise timing, psychological layering, and more improvisation than most people realise. Think less barbaric hammering, and more sinister jazz. You don't walk into the chamber swinging chains like some drunken barbarian. No, you enter calm, deliberate, almost gentle. That alone unnerves them. You offer water. You adjust the stool. You check the rope tension with a craftsman's eye. You want them wondering, is this the torturer, or just some assistant? It's already begun. The goal isn't pain, it's cooperation, or the illusion of it. If you do it right, the subject doesn't even realise when they gave up the thing they swore they'd never say. That's why your best tool isn't the rack or the screw. It's your voice, your silence, your timing. You start with the easy questions. Name, occupation, why are you here? You nod along as they answer, writing it all down as if this is a casual interview and not the prelude to their darkest day. It lowers their guard, makes you human, or at least less inhuman. Then you shift. You ask about the night they were seen leaving the monastery, or the neighbour who says they muttered Latin backwards. You don't accuse, you just suggest. And when they start denying things, you introduce pressure. Pressure can mean anything. For one person, it's the sharp edge of a wedge under their toenail. For another, it's being suspended by the wrists until shoulders nearly pop. The trick is knowing which lever to pull, and when. Historical fact. Confession extracted under torture was often considered legally valid if the confession was confirmed the next day without coercion. As if someone who just had their fingers crushed would suddenly recant over breakfast. Your sessions last anywhere from minutes to hours, rarely longer. Too much damage, and the prisoner becomes useless. You walk a razor-thin line between effectiveness and obliteration. Sometimes, the accused screams at the first touch. Other times, they go eerily quiet. You've learned to fear both reactions. There was a man once, accused of spying for a rival lord, who smiled the whole time. Didn't speak. Didn't break. Just grinned, even when you started tightening the vise on his ankle. He died without a word. His body didn't flinch even in the end. You still remember that face when you close your eyes. You didn't sleep for 3 nights. And yet, there's a flow state you enter when the session goes right. When the confessions start to unravel like thread from a spool. They gasp, they sob, and suddenly they're telling you everything. Who they met, where the gatherings were held, who else was involved. You nod, jotting names down, adding little underlines to the dangerous ones. You're building a web, and in that moment, you almost feel like a scholar, an archivist of sin. Sometimes, though, it falls apart. They lie. They stall. They collapse and say anything just to make you stop. And that's the gamble. Are you hearing truth or desperation? Historians still argue whether torture actually worked. Some claim it produced more false confessions than real ones. Others argue it served its purpose, not to find truth, but to create order through fear. The jury's still out, probably because they were too scared to vote honestly. And you? You don't get to choose who shows up in your chamber. You just deal with them. There was a girl once, barely 14, accused of harbouring suspicious dreams. The priest wanted you to extract a confession that she'd been speaking with demons. But you saw the tremble in her hands, the dirt under her nails. She was just scared, exhausted. So instead of fire, you used silence. You sat with her, said nothing, stared. Let the walls speak. After 2 hours, she broke, not because of pain, but because of imagination. She invented an entire tale about a talking dog that led her to buried scrolls. It was absurd. The priest believed it anyway. That night, you skipped dinner. Your appetite died with her story. Not every session leaves you clean. Some cling like oil, impossible to wash away. Quirky tidbit. The term Spanish tickler refers to a clawed tool used for ripping flesh, though in many cases it was used more as a threat than a weapon. You keep one on the wall, haven't touched it in years, but it's always in view. You've learned that implied violence often works better than the real thing. Your most effective move? Walking out of the room. Let them sit. Let their fear ferment. Let their mind conjure horrors you haven't even thought of. You return 15 minutes later, and suddenly they're willing to admit they're the devil's nephew. You take everything down. Carefully. Scribes will copy it later. The council will review it. And everyone pretends it was all above board. It rarely is. But that's the system. You didn't build it. You just know how to use it. And use it well. It always starts the same way. You receive a sealed order bearing a wax crest, maybe from the mayor, maybe from the bishop, or one of those eager young magistrates still pretending they aren't terrified of you. The message is simple. Someone is to undergo an ordeal. Trial by fire. Or water. Or iron. You don't get to pick. You just prepare the tools, nod to the guards, and make sure everything's fair. Sevens, because in this system, pain equals proof. These aren't punishments, mind you. These are divine tests. Justice, outsourced to heaven. You're not deciding guilt or innocence. You're just the officiant at a holy Q&A session where the gods reply through burns, blisters, and blood loss. Your first ordeal? Fire. A young man accused of theft from the church tithe box. No witnesses, no evidence, but suspicion is enough, so you're told to oversee a trial. The task? He has to carry a red-hot iron bar for 3 paces. Then you bind his hands and wait 3 days. If his wounds fester, he's guilty. If they're clean, he's innocent. Spoiler. They always fester. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were truly believed to be divine or just ritualized scapegoating. Some think the clergy genuinely believed God would protect the innocent. Others suspect it was a grim theatrical shortcut. If people saw pain used fairly, they'd obey the law to avoid it. You don't philosophize. You just watch the boy pick up the glowing bar with trembling fingers, hear the skin sizzle, and see his lips clamp shut to keep from screaming. You don't admire his courage. You just write it down. No protest. Carried full distance. That's your job. The town watches too. Ordeals are public. A crowd gathers, kids, elders, beggars. Everyone loves a bit of divine drama. Some cheer when he drops the iron. Others gasp. The priest mutters something about God's will and signs a cross in the air. You wrap the boy's hands in linen and place him in a cell. You already know the outcome, but the ritual matters more than the result. Another time, it's a woman accused of poisoning a neighbour's cow. No proof, just gossip and a slightly greenish butter churn. She's subjected to the ordeal of cold water, tied at the wrists and ankles, dropped into the river. If she sinks, she's innocent. If she floats, she's guilty. Yes, you read that right. Your role? Tie the knots. Make sure they're snug, but not deadly. Whisper a warning to the guards about the current. Pretend this isn't madness. She floats, of course. They all float. The human body, when tied properly and terrified, doesn't sink fast. You pull her out, dripping and gasping, and she's condemned within minutes. Poisoner, heretic, maybe witch, whatever they need her to be. There's a quiet shame in these moments, not from you, but from the audience. They know this isn't right, but the illusion of fairness is more comforting than the chaos of doubt. They want to believe that pain is proof, because otherwise. What governs justice? Luck. Status. Coin. Okay, yes. But let's not say that out loud. Quirky tidbit. The ordeal of the Eucharist once required the accused to consume holy bread. If they choked, they were guilty. If they swallowed it cleanly, innocent. You watched this once. A trembling merchant with shaky hands and a guilty conscience gagged before the wafer even hit his throat. The crowd gasped. The bishop nodded. Case closed. There's a cruel efficiency to these rituals. You keep the tools ready. Hot irons stacked in sand. Buckets near the riverbank. Ropes coiled neatly. Each item has its place. Each step is practiced. Because even when justice is divine, the logistics are yours. Sometimes the accused walk calmly to their ordeal. Other times, they beg. They sob. One man fell to his knees, swearing innocence, offering his only daughter as a servant in exchange for mercy. You said nothing, because your mercy isn't yours to give. You're just the hand that carries the flame. You wonder sometimes if God watches these trials. If he sees a child scream as boiling water pours over her arm and thinks, yes, this is justice. Or if he just looks away, like everyone else. Historians still debate whether the church ever genuinely believed in these rituals or used them to placate crowds. There's some evidence that, when the outcome was politically inconvenient, the records were simply adjusted. That a wound that festered was called clean. That a woman who drowned was declared a martyr, not a victim. You've seen that. The quiet whispers between scribes, the corrections on parchment, the reworded verdicts. And still, the wheel turns. You don't flinch anymore. Not when the iron bar sears flesh. Not when a teenager is hauled out of a river coughing up lake water. You've seen too much. Or maybe not enough. The hardest ordeal you ever watched. A priest, accused by another clergyman of hoarding relics. A political move, likely. You were ordered to carry out the ordeal of the glowing ploughshare. The priest had to walk across it barefoot. He lasted 3 steps. You swore the skin on his feet melted like wax. He screamed, oh yes. But afterward, he looked you in the eye and whispered, I did nothing wrong. 7s. 3 days later, his wounds were bandaged. Not festering. Not healing either. Just hanging in limbo. The court called it divine confusion. They executed him anyway. And you cleaned the ploughshare and set it aside for the next time God needed a little help making up his mind. The witch hunt starts slowly. Whispers, dreams, strange smells in the night. Then someone finds a chicken with backwards feathers or a bucket of spoiled milk, and suddenly the village matron who's lived alone since the plague is being hauled in by the guards. And just like that, your calendar is full. Witch hunting season isn't official. There's no parade or banner, but you feel it in the air. The sermons get louder. The neighbours get nosier. The fear gets sharper. And in the middle of it all is you, the torturer, suddenly tasked with deciding whether someone has a pact with the devil based on the direction their cat was facing during a thunderstorm. It would be funny if it wasn't so deeply, horribly real. You start your morning with a confession already on the table. A woman named Miller, widowed, herbalist, knows which mushrooms are safe and which ones put men to sleep for 3 days. The town's midwife swears she saw Miller chant something over a dead goat. Now she's here, shaking, and you're expected to find the devil's fingerprint on her. You examine her arms. No marks. You ask her simple questions. Does she speak with spirits? Has she flown? Has she lain with Satan? The usual checklist. She says no, quietly, but her eyes twitch when you mention her dreams. That's all you need. You order her bound, not harshly, but enough to remind her she's not in her cottage anymore. Then comes the test. Pricking. Quirky tidbit, some witch hunters travelled with specialised needles, dull-tipped, meant to find the witch's mark, a spot on the body that would not bleed or feel pain. You have one. It's carved bone, smooth with age, and utterly ridiculous. You still use it. Ceremony matters. You go over her skin slowly. When she doesn't flinch at a spot near her shoulder blade, you glance at the scribe. He nods. Confirmed, he mutters. That's all it takes. Sometimes you wonder if you're a torturer or a magician, pulling verdicts from scars, drawing guilt from silence. Historians still argue whether the witch trials were driven by genuine belief or raw political convenience. Some say the church truly feared sorcery. Others point to land grabs, jealousy, or the need to distract the public with a new enemy. You suspect both. And neither. Because at some point, belief becomes irrelevant. Hysteria has its own momentum. Once it starts rolling, people like you are just the cogs that keep it spinning. Your next subject is younger, barely 18. Her name's Daria, the miller's daughter, accused by a travelling friar who heard her humming in Latin. She swears it was a prayer. He swears it was a summoning. You don't need proof. You need results. You begin with questioning, calm at first, then louder, then with the strappado, suspension by the wrists, pulled behind the back. Painful, not fatal. Just enough to bring tears and maybe an apology to whatever divine force will make it stop. She breaks. They all do. She admits to seeing spirits in the woods, claims they asked for milk and honey, says she refused. But the confession is enough. The friar nods. Case closed. You feel nothing. Or maybe you feel too much, but it's buried under years of practice. And then come the burnings. You don't light the pyres. That's the executioner's job. But you're there, standing to the side, arms folded, watching the flames curl around women who once delivered babies and brewed teas and whispered old prayers by candlelight. There's no satisfaction in it. Only ash. Historical fact. In many parts of Europe, suspected witches were hanged rather than burned. But in more devout areas, especially those influenced by inquisitorial practices, fire was preferred. It was believed to purify the soul. You've seen enough to know fire just purifies records. No one asks questions when everything's been turned to smoke. You once tried to object. Quietly, suggested a woman be spared. The council thanked you for your input and then assigned you 3 sessions back-to-back as a reminder of your role. Lesson learned. You don't make suggestions anymore. One day, a man is brought in. That's rare. He's a woodsman, accused of love potions and moon barking, whatever that means. He's large, bruised, and angry. You prepare the bench, the clamps, the press. He doesn't resist the tools. He just stares at you. You know I'm not a witch, he says. You nod. Not my decision. Sevens. Then why are you doing this? Sevens. You think about it. Maybe longer than you should. Then you give the only answer you can. Because they asked me to. Sevens. He laughs, short and bitter. Coward. Sevens. You turn the wheel. You try not to hear the snap. Afterward, when the chamber is quiet again, you sit down on the steps outside. It's late. The moon is thin. The town is asleep. You look at your hands and wonder if they'll ever be clean again. But tomorrow, someone else will be accused. Another mark will need to be pricked. Another confession will be needed before the sun sets. And you'll do your part. Because you're not the judge, not the executioner. You're just the one who makes sure the story gets told the way the town wants it told. You and the executioner are not the same person. That's important. He swings the axe. You turn the screws. He ends things. You start them. You'd think that would make you natural allies, two outcasts on the town's payroll, each with a taste for the morbid. But you're not friends. You respect each other. Sure. He nods when he sees you in the market. You nod back. You both know the weight of silence. But you keep your distance. Not out of hatred, just survival. Because when one of you becomes too much, guess who they replace first? Not him. You. Your tools coax confessions. His tools erase them. Take Hans, the current executioner. Tall, quiet, smells vaguely of garlic and smoked meat. Has a daughter he doesn't talk about. Wears gloves all the time, even in summer. You once saw him crush a walnut with his bare palm. That kind of man. He doesn't enjoy it, by the way. Not that you've asked. But you've seen the look in his eyes just before a beheading. That blank, shut-down stare. Same one you wear when you're tightening ropes. The mind turning off the part that cares. Sometimes, though, your paths cross. There's overlap, especially during public executions. Someone confesses, thanks to your efforts, and they're sentenced. Then it's up to Hans to make the ending nice and clean. Or messy. Depends on the mood of the crowd. Historical fact. Medieval executioners weren't just headsmen. They also carried out amputations, brandings, even public humiliations like the stocks. In some towns, they doubled as city cleaners, removing corpses, clearing waste. Not glamorous, not noble, just necessary. Just like you. You've worked side by side. There was that time the prisoner tried to recant mid-march to the gallows. Claimed his confession wasn't freely given. Fair enough. You'd pulled his shoulder out of socket halfway through. The crowd got uneasy. Hans looked at you. You nodded. He nodded back. Then the man was silenced. Swiftly. Crowd settled. You didn't speak a word that day. Didn't need to. But things aren't always so neat. There was a case, the baker's son, accused of plotting against the mayor. No torture. No confession. Just rumours and a vendetta. Hans was told to execute anyway. He refused. Said he wouldn't kill a man who hadn't admitted guilt. Said that's your job, not mine. It caused a stir. The council brought you in, eyes narrowed. Can you extract something? They asked. You could. You didn't. Said the boy was too weak. Wouldn't survive even one session. That was a lie. He was healthy. He could have taken some pain. But you saw something in Hans that day. A line. And, strangely, you wanted to back him up. The boy was banished instead. Left barefoot, holding a crust of bread and a prayer. Sometimes mercy slips through the cracks. Quirky tidbit. Executioners often wore hoods not to look scary, but to protect themselves from retaliation. Families of the condemned might attack them afterward, so anonymity was armour. You've considered a hood yourself, but you know it wouldn't help. People always remember the torturer's face. You and Hans once drank together. Just once. After a fire gutted half the prison. No prisoners died, but your tools were destroyed. Took weeks to rebuild your collection. Hans brought you mead. Sat beside you on the stone wall outside the chapel. Neither of you said anything for nearly an hour. Finally, he muttered, "Think there's a hell?" Sevens. You shrugged. Hope so. Be nice if someone else handled judgment for a change. Sevens. He didn't laugh. Just poured more mead. Historians still argue whether people in your position truly believed in heaven or hell, or if those concepts dulled after enough time on the job. Some say you had to believe to justify it all. Others think you stopped believing entirely, because no god worth worshipping would ever let people like you exist. You don't spend much time on theology. You're too busy scheduling your next session. Sevens. Still, you and Hans understand each other in ways no one else can. The blacksmith doesn't know what it's like to hear someone beg for their life. The tailor doesn't know what it's like to see a man wet himself just from the sound of chains. You know, he knows. And that knowing creates a silent kind of kinship. One you don't speak of. One you don't celebrate. But it's there. In the nods. In the passing glances. In the fact that neither of you ever speaks the other's name unless absolutely necessary. You're both tools. Different ends of the same grim machine. You begin the unravelling. He finishes it. Some nights, the priest stops by. Not to hear your confession. You've long since accepted that's a lost cause. No, he comes with a flask of something sharp, a look of quiet disapproval, and a need to pretend everything's still holy. You offer him the wooden stool near the fire. He takes it with a wince, robes rustling like dry leaves. He doesn't look at your tools. He never does. You respect that. I've come from the convent, he says, or the bishop's worried about morale, or we had another sermon interrupted by coughing. Whatever the excuse, you both know what he's really here for. He's checking your soul. Not to save it, he gave up on that years ago, but to see how close you are to unravelling. Because if you crack, the whole system risks exposure. Torturers don't get to break down. They just get replaced. Quietly. So the priest comes to audit your conscience. You make tea. He pretends not to notice the brown stain on the rim of your tankard. You talk about weather, politics, a merchant's son who tripped into the river. And then, eventually, he edges toward it. Do you ever wonder if this work serves God? Sevens. You smile. The slow, tired kind that says we've had this talk before. You tell him the same thing every time. I serve the people. If God has complaints, he can take it up with the mayor. Sevens. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval torturers carried personal relics, bits of bone, splinters of wood, even pebbles blessed by monks. Not for faith, for protection. Superstition and ritual blurred easily when your daily routine involved fire and screaming. You have one, too. A tiny iron cross your mother gave you, rusted and crooked. You keep it tucked in your boot. Not because it works, but because you're not willing to find out what happens if you stop wearing it. The priest once asked to bless your tools. You refused. Not because you're proud, but because if the instruments of your work become holy, then where does the sin go? Better to keep the two worlds separate. You and religion have a mutual understanding. It stays in the church. You stay in the cellar. Occasionally, you cross paths. But you never hold hands. Still, they use you. The bishop's office has sent more than one special case your way. Accused heretics, rebellious monks, women who quote the wrong scripture. They claim it's for the good of the faith. That truth must be preserved, even if it has to be pulled out one tendon at a time. You ask no questions. You just read the parchment and light the coals. Historians still argue whether church officials genuinely believed in torture as a divine tool or simply used it as leverage. Papal decrees swayed back and forth. One pope condemned it. The next endorsed it, quietly. One theologian said it was a necessary purification. Another called it a perversion of grace. Depends which scroll survives, and which was burned. You've read some of those scrolls. Bits of Latin, smeared ink, words that twist themselves into knots trying to say, pain can be holy. You're not convinced. Your sessions with religious targets are always stranger. They don't beg the way others do. They quote psalms. They chant. One woman sang a lullaby the entire time you applied the press to her fingers. The priest who observed had tears in his eyes. You kept going anyway, because once you start the process, there's no pause button. It's not just the accused on trial. It's you. Your performance. Your resolve. Your ability to keep order. There was a monk once, thin, eyes like glowing embers, who looked you in the face and said, "I forgive you." Sevens. Before you'd touched him. Before you'd even asked a question. You remember that moment better than any scream, because for a split second you felt exposed, like someone had seen through the layers of leather, sweat, and authority, and found something soft inside. You worked quickly after that. Too quickly. His confession was short, confused, unusable. The bishop's scribe called it a waste. You didn't argue. Later, alone, you threw up in the alley behind the stables. First time in years. Since then, you've learned to disengage faster. Put up walls. Hear the chants, but don't listen to them. Let the priest whisper his absolutions over your shoulder. Let him pretend he's blessing the process. You don't need his approval. You just need him to leave. Still, he keeps coming back. Maybe he thinks he's saving you, keeping your soul just one breath above damnation. Maybe he's just as trapped as you are. You sometimes wonder if his sermons mention people like you. If, buried between the parables and the proverbs, he ever talks about necessary sins, about the man in the shadows who keeps the rest of the town clean by being so profoundly dirty. Maybe that's your role in the divine order, not a sinner, not a saint. Just the scapegoat who volunteered for the slaughter. He finishes his tea, offers a blessing you don't accept. Then he disappears back into the morning fog, robe flapping like a tattered sail. And you go back to work. Because whether or not God is watching, the council definitely is. Off duty. You're no one. You walk through the market and heads turn, then turn away. The baker, who gives everyone else a cheery "morning," just nods at you. The blacksmith wipes his hands on his apron and pretends to be busy hammering. Children are yanked away by nervous mothers like you've got plague leaking from your fingertips. You smell like smoke. You carry it with you, even when you bathe, even when you scrub until your knuckles bleed. People say your cottage glows faintly at night, as if the ghosts inside can't quite extinguish their own misery. You've leaned into the myth. Let them believe it. It's better than the truth. You sit alone most nights with bread that's going stale, listening to the creak of your own bones and wondering if anyone would come to your funeral. Quirky tidbit. In several medieval towns, torturers were denied burial in consecrated ground. Some had their own section of the graveyard, walled off from the good souls. Others were buried at crossroads, so their spirit wouldn't know where to wander. You're not planning on dying soon, but you've picked your crossroads anyway, just in case. You tried visiting the tavern once. Thought maybe you'd blend in. Just sit in the corner, enjoy a drink, pretend to be normal for an hour. It didn't go well. The room went quiet the moment you walked in. Chairs scraped. Someone coughed too loudly. And when the innkeeper finally served you, the ale was flat and warm. Deliberate. You drank it anyway. You don't go back. Instead, your free time is spent in small rituals. Sharpening blades, polishing metal, reading whatever scraps of parchment you can scavenge, old sermons, bad poetry, even a failed cookbook someone used to mop up wine. Anything to remind yourself that you still know how to read, that your brain can do more than calculate pain thresholds. Sometimes, you sit by the window and watch people pass by. Not with envy, with distance. You're not one of them anymore. Not really. You belong to a different class entirely. Not noble, not peasant, just other. A social outcast who's still on the town ledger. A name they mutter in warnings. Historians still argue whether torturers were isolated because of their role, or chosen from those who were already isolated. It's a chicken or rat situation. Either way, you live alone, die alone, and, most likely, your name will be scratched off records as quickly as possible. You've had conversations, of course. the occasional guard who forgets to be afraid, the traveller who doesn't know who you are, yet, even a widow once, curious and a little drunk, who asked you about your hobbies. 7s, you told her you liked building things. She laughed. You weren't joking. Your hands may hurt, your joints may click like rusted hinges, but you're still good with wood. You've built shelves, a stool, once, a small cage for an injured bird that fell down your chimney. You fed it for 3 days before it died anyway. You buried it under a tree behind the cottage and didn't tell anyone. Because who would you tell? You don't get invited to weddings. You aren't included in feasts. The mayor once gave you a token gift basket at Yuletide, cheese, smoked fish, a small bottle of wine. You set it on your table, stared at it for a week, and then fed most of it to stray dogs. You did keep the wine. Every once in a while, someone knocks on your door, usually a child, dared by others to touch the torturer's house. They run the moment you answer, giggling through their fear. You don't chase them. You just close the door and lean against it for a while. It's not hatred you feel from people. It's unease. You are a mirror, a reminder of what order really costs. As long as you're around, people remember that the world doesn't work on kindness alone. There's a certain power in that, but not joy. You once thought about quitting, packing a small bag, changing your name, heading south to a warmer town where no one knew your face. But then what? You've built your entire life on this role. You know anatomy better than gardening. You read people better than you read maps. What do you do with that? You're not innocent anymore. And that doesn't wash off. So you stay. You clean your boots. You stack your firewood. You feed the rats that have made a polite home beneath your floorboards. You even gave one of them a name, Gregor. He's missing a leg. You respect that. At night, when it's quiet, you sometimes lie awake imagining what it would be like to be someone else. A weaver. A candle maker. Someone with soft hands and invitations to church dinners. Someone who smells like beeswax and not smoke. And then you wake up. Put on the same clothes. Walk the same path. You are the torturer. Off duty, uninvited, and still, somehow, essential. You think you're the only one who does this job? Not even close. Pain is global. Misery knows how to pack a suitcase. And wherever there's a kingdom, a crown, or a mildly paranoid baron, there's someone like you in a basement or a back room, making sure the walls stay quiet. You've heard stories from travellers, traders, mercenaries, once even a musician, about how other places handle information extraction. You listen carefully. Professional curiosity. Sometimes with a little envy. Other times with relief. Take France, for instance. They're big fans of Le Question Extraordinaire, a long, theatrical process involving ropes, weights, and an almost romantic sense of flair. You respect it. But their torturers are expected to talk fancy while they work, quoting philosophers and local saints. You'd last maybe an hour. They also use water. Not like you do, with buckets and cloth, but in huge quantities. Pouring gallons down the throat to simulate drowning. Very popular with inquisitors. Known to cause convulsions, ruptured stomachs, and a lot of inconvenient deaths. Efficient, sure, but messy, and hard to write a clean report afterward. Spain, predictably, takes things to extremes. Their inquisitorial techniques are practically a brand. You once met a Spanish torturer passing through. He showed you a drawing of a device that resembled a pear, except it opened. Inside someone. You didn't sleep well after that. He smiled the whole time, said it was just business. You nodded like you agreed, but you didn't. Historical fact. The Spanish Inquisition employed formal torturers who were well compensated, well protected, and closely supervised. They worked from scripts, literally, pre-written phrases to ensure the process stayed controlled. Bureaucracy with a blade. Then there's Italy, where church politics twist torture into opera. One moment, you're dealing with someone accused of heresy. The next, a cardinal's personal enemy needs correcting. Torturers there work in shadows behind shadows. One slip, and they become the ones on the table. You've heard of a Roman chamber with a rotating floor and hidden grates to drain the blood. You think it's a myth, but part of you kind of hopes it's not. Germany is practical. Their torturers are more like engineers. They build clever machines, gears, levers, pulleys, half of them designed by ex-blacksmiths with too much time and not enough friends. One German design you tried replicating once involved a series of weights tied to the knees while the arms were pulled upward. You didn't get the mechanics quite right. Broke a man's hip prematurely. Lesson learned. Quirky tidbit. In some Slavic regions, it was traditional to sing to the accused while torturing them, old folk chants meant to calm the soul. You tried humming once. It just made everything worse. Never again. The Ottomans, now they're on a different level. Precision, ritual, layers of hierarchy. Their torturers, called chelat, were silent professionals. No names, no personal questions, no interaction beyond the task. You admire that. Distance is hard to keep when you're elbow deep in someone's confession. You once watched an Ottoman emissary's guard extract information from a traitor, using nothing but oil, a feather, and patience. Took 2 hours. No blood, no bruises, just slow, creeping terror. You were genuinely impressed. Back in your own town, you're a blend of all of this. A Frankenstein's monster of methods. You borrow techniques, test new patterns, refine your timing like a musician rehearsing scales. Sometimes you wonder if any of the others wonder about you. Are there torturers in Baghdad thinking, I wonder how they do it in the north? Are there Mongol captains perfecting psychological pressure instead of brute force? Probably not. But the thought is strangely comforting. You're not alone. You're part of an unspoken guild, a grim, global fraternity stitched together by cruelty, pressure, and professional detachment. No meetings, no handshakes, just a shared silence across borders. Historians still argue whether torture spread organically across cultures or was actively taught, imported via mercenaries, crusaders, and diplomats. There's evidence both ways. Torture techniques show eerie similarities between places that never officially communicated. But ideas leak. People talk. Pain travels. You once dreamed of writing a manual. A little handbook. Not how-tos, exactly, but reflections, warnings, tips. Don't underestimate a quiet prisoner. Never let a confession end on a laugh. Fire is for theatre, not truth. But no one would read it, or admit they had. And if they found it in your cottage after you die, well, better burn it just in case. The truth is, the world has always needed people like you. Not often, not proudly, but urgently. Kings lie. Nobles scheme. Secrets rot in silence. And someone has to bring those secrets to light. You're just one flickering torch among thousands. But in the dark, even one flame matters. The church says it's against torture. Officially. You try not to laugh when you hear that. It's one of those lies everyone agrees to pretend is true, like the Lord's Son pays taxes, or the bread isn't mostly sawdust. Sevens. The church says it abhors violence. That mercy is divine. That confession must come freely. And yet, there you are, in the bishop's ledger. Paid in silver. Assigned cases involving whispered heresies, disobedient monks, and, occasionally, old women who knew too much Latin. You've learned to read between the lines. When a parchment arrives from the abbey marked with a seal and a discreet "do not delay," you know it means We need this problem to go away before morning prayers. Sometimes they even write it as a request. If you deem it appropriate, you may apply corrective pressure. The wording is soft, pillow soft, but you know what it means. You always do. You have a whole category in your notebook labelled clerical winks. Quirky tidbit. Despite their denials, many inquisitorial orders had dedicated torture chambers built into monasteries, behind secret doors, below wine cellars, accessed through chapel basements. You visited one once, a former crypt, cold as bone, with a ceiling too low to stand upright. It still smelled like incense and regret. The church tries to keep its hands clean, but your hands do the work. There was a priest once, Father Elric. Young, kind-eyed, too idealistic for the collar he wore. He came to observe one of your sessions, said he was documenting heretical patterns. Really, he was trying to test his own tolerance. You let him watch the whole process. You started slow, asked questions, tightened straps, used the rope press on the suspect's thumbs, just enough to make them sweat. Father Elric turned pale by the second crack. By the fourth, he was vomiting into the corner. You offered him water afterward. He didn't speak to you again for 6 months. Historians still argue whether the Inquisition's torture practices were a reflection of true doctrinal policy or simply a convenient loophole exploited by individual clergy. Some documents suggest the popes condemned torture outright, only to later authorise exceptions. Others imply the real power lay with the local inquisitors, who interpreted rules with creative enthusiasm. You know the truth. You see it in every letter sealed with a cross. Interrogate. Clarify. Loosen the tongue. Sevens. All of it dressed up in scripture and noble intent. But underneath, same chains. Same screams. You once had a case involving 3 nuns accused of harbouring forbidden texts. You expected a mess, hysteria, wailing, maybe someone pretending to be possessed. Instead, they were calm. The eldest even requested quills and ink to write her defence. The council denied the request, asked you to intervene. You brought them in one by one. The youngest broke first, not from pain, but from fear. She confessed to hiding the texts in the garden wall. You found them, nothing dangerous. Writings on herbal medicine, lunar cycles, and a questionable poem about St. George. Still, the bishop deemed them heretical. He thanked you for your diligence, and then he had the garden wall rebuilt before anyone else could look too closely. That's how it works. The church preaches light, but it operates in shadow. You are that shadow. And the irony? Sometimes the people you interrogate are more faithful than the priests who sent them. You once tortured a man who screamed prayers between every answer. He confessed to nothing, died still mumbling psalms. The bishop called it a spiritual victory. You called it a pointless death. Sevens. There's a specific smell the chapel has the day after a burning. Sweet, faintly acrid. The scent of sanctified wood and cooked marrow. You've started avoiding morning mass. No one says anything. They're probably relieved. Once, during confession, you heard a friar admit he was afraid of you. Not because of what you do, but because he sometimes thinks it might be necessary. That terrified him. You slipped out before he could see your face. Because if the friars start justifying you, there's no one left to stop the wheel. Still, the church keeps using you. Quietly. Carefully. As long as you don't cause a scandal, you'll always have a place in the holy machine. You've stopped expecting absolution. Stopped asking for forgiveness. Because if God exists, and he's watching, he already knows exactly what you are. And if he's not, then the only judgment that matters is your own. Some prisoners don't scream. Some don't plead. Some don't even blink when you reach for the blade. Those are the dangerous ones. Because when they stop fearing you, you lose control. You remember the first time it happened. A man accused of plotting against the magistrate. Middle-aged, broad-shouldered, scars on his forearms from old battles. He didn't flinch when the guards brought him in. Didn't wince when you strapped him down. Just stared. You started routine. Polite, even. Asked questions. No answer. Tightened the ropes. Still silence. You picked up the thumbscrews, turning them slowly, letting the light glint off the edge. Most people react to that. He didn't. When you applied the first twist, nothing. The second, still nothing. By the third, you were sweating more than he was. And then he laughed. Not a wild, broken laugh. A calm, cruel chuckle, like you're cute for trying. You tightened again. This time you heard the crack, but not from his mouth. From bone. Still, he kept eye contact. That's when it hit you. This wasn't fear-resistant. This was someone who wanted to fight back. Someone with rage tucked behind their teeth, just waiting for the right moment. You called the guard early. Later that week, the man was found dead in his cell, strangled with a strip of his own tunic. No official investigation. You never found out if it was suicide or the guard doing you a favour. Historians still argue whether medieval prisons were deliberately cruel or simply neglected into horror. Some say guards were underpaid and left unchecked. Others think fear of retaliation, like from people you couldn't break, led to quiet executions. You've seen both, and you've learned to spot the warning signs. A twitch in the jaw, a flex of the foot against the floor. The subtle way someone exhales, not with panic, but with planning. One woman came at you with her teeth. You were leaning in, adjusting a strap, and she lunged, bit your cheek clean through your skin. Blood gushed. You staggered back. She spat your flesh at your boots. You still have the scar. Jagged. Pink. You've named it Anna. Sevens. From then on, you changed your protocol. No more leaning in. You started using tongs for certain bindings. Guards stayed closer. One always kept a cudgel within arm's reach. And you never, ever underestimated anyone. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval torturers wore masks during sessions, not to hide their identity, but to dehumanize themselves and to intimidate prisoners. You tried it once. Didn't help. Just made you sweat harder and miss subtle facial cues. You tossed it into the fire that same day. There was another man, thin, soft-spoken, barely older than a boy, accused of heresy and sedition. He waited until the third session. You'd just finished documenting his confession when he asked for water. You turned. That's when he lunged, chain still attached to one wrist. He got your knife. Almost used it. The guard caught him just in time. You got lucky. You didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because you realised. You'd started believing the room protected you, that the straps and chains and rituals created a barrier, but nothing protects you from someone with nothing left to lose. Since then, you always double-check every knot. You test restraints twice. You speak more carefully. Even your posture has changed, angled, alert, less comfortable. The room is still yours. But now, you remember it can turn on you in a heartbeat. You've had to put people down before. You don't like to admit that. It's not part of your job. But once someone turns violent beyond control, starts kicking, spitting, trying to claw your eyes, you're allowed to respond. Allowed. Not required. But when it's your life or theirs, the choice feels made for you. You keep count in the back of your mind. Not on paper. Not in your records. Just there. 3 people you've killed outside of orders. All self-defense. All justified. That's what you tell yourself. The last one was a woman who'd been silent for days. Then, without warning, she broke the thumb cuff and went for your throat with the jagged edge. You acted on instinct. Slammed her head against the bench. She stopped moving. You waited an hour before calling the guard. You didn't say what happened. The council assumed she died under questioning. You didn't correct them. Historians still debate whether torturers were given too much autonomy. Some argue they operated under strict supervision. Others say the system needed them to improvise, to take care of problems off the books. You're living proof of the second theory. These moments haunt you more than the screams. Because they weren't torture. They were chaos. And you hate chaos. You like rules, rituals, controlled pain, administered with purpose. But these moments when the roles flip, when you become the one being feared, that's when you remember. This job doesn't just destroy your soul. It might one day destroy your body, too. So you walk differently now. Keep a dagger in your boot. Sleep with a hammer beside the bed. And when someone new is brought in, someone silent, someone calm, you take a little longer to begin. Because you know what they might be thinking. They're not praying. They're waiting. Some days, it's not the screams that get to you. It's the creak in your back when you bend over to adjust a strap. It's the way your fingers refuse to grip the clamp the first time. It's the dull ache behind your eyes that never fully leaves anymore. The tools haven't broken you. You've broken you. It happens slowly, like rot under floorboards. You don't notice it until you step wrong and the whole structure groans. At first, it was manageable. A sore wrist here, a bruised knuckle there, a twisted ankle from slipping on blood-slick stone. Occupational hazards. You wore them like armour. Told yourself the pain made you sharp, grounded, humble. Now it's different. Now you wake up and it takes 3 full breaths before you can straighten. Your knees crack like dry branches. You dropped a thumbscrew last week and couldn't pick it up for 2 minutes. Just stared at it, like maybe it would climb back into your hand on its own. It didn't. Historical fact. Torture tools were heavy. The rack alone could weigh more than a dozen sacks of grain. Torturers weren't just sinister, they had to be strong, practical, and often worked with blacksmiths to maintain their gear. You've been both tormentor and technician, and it shows. You've lost weight in some places, gained it in others. Your shoulders are corded with muscle, but your legs have gone stiff. You try stretches. You even copied poses you saw a monk doing behind the chapel once. You fell over. The rats seemed amused. There's a mark on your left palm. A burn from when you slipped and grabbed the iron bar without gloves. That was 2 winters ago. The scar hasn't faded. You call it the stamp, like the job finally branded you back. Quirky tidbit. In some regions, torturers were exempt from certain types of physical labour, not out of kindness, but because their hands were considered state property. Damaged fingers meant delayed confessions, and delayed confessions meant disorder. Your hands are not state property. They're yours, and they're failing. The strappado winch needs 2 full turns now, where one used to do. You tell the guards to assist more often, not because they need training, but because you can't pretend it's effortless anymore. You're still feared, still respected, but only because you hide the signs. You practice your grip with pebbles at night, 1 in each hand. Squeeze. Hold. Squeeze again. You whisper your name with each breath, just to remind yourself you're not dead yet. You had a fever last autumn. 4 days in bed, sweating through your sheets, hallucinating that your tools were whispering to you. When you finally staggered back into the chamber, the prisoner gasped. You looked more tortured than he did. You laughed, then coughed up blood. Less funny. No one brings you medicine. No one checks on you unless a confession is late. You're not indispensable. You're just the one doing the job. And if you falter too much, someone younger, stronger, hungrier will take your place. That fear is sharper than any blade. So you adapt. You simplify your process. Shorter sessions, less flair. You pick targets who fold fast, and you convince the council its efficiency. You say things like, "Speed breeds fear," and they nod like you're a genius. But the truth? Speed is survival. Historians still argue whether torturers were given breaks, days off, or assistance. Some accounts suggest certain cities cycled their torturers to avoid psychological collapse. Others say replacements were only trained after the incumbent dropped dead at the bench. You believe the latter. You tried training someone once. A boy with steady hands, soft voice, no family, perfect candidate. He lasted 2 sessions. Then he threw up on your tools, ran screaming into the street, and never came back. The town never asked you to train again. You're alone with your bones and your rusting joints. Every cracked knuckle reminds you that your body was never designed for this much tension, this much repetition. You've built up calluses, yes, but beneath them, you're tissue and blood like anyone else. One morning, you dropped the iron bridle on your foot. The pain shot through you like a lightning bolt. You sat down hard, eyes watering, and for a moment, just a flicker, you thought, maybe this is it. Maybe the work's over. But no, you limped to the workbench, taped your foot with linen, finished the day, and not one person noticed the change in your gait. That's what terrifies you most. Not that you're in pain, but that no one sees it. That you could die in this chair, mid-session, mid-scream, and the prisoner might not even realise it right away. Just think it was part of the performance. Sometimes you dream of walking into the forest. Just keep walking until your legs give out. Find a hollow tree, lie down, and let the world go on without you. No one would chase you. They'd just shrug, send a letter to the next village, and hire a new hand. You never take the walk. Not because you're noble, because you still need the job. Because you've given so much of your body to this role, you don't know where it ends and you begin. The tools haven't broken you, but they've left their mark. And every morning, you wake up feeling a little more like one of them. You're not famous. Not really. No one's composing ballads about your sessions or carving your name into the cathedral walls. But among those who know, your name carries weight. And if you think you're grim, wait until you meet the others. There's a long, dark history of people like you, torturers who went beyond efficiency, beyond necessity, and straight into legend. Not because they were brilliant, but because they were memorable in ways that make even you wince. Take Johann von Schongau, the Black Hook of Bavaria. Used a custom-built iron claw he called the Herald. He believed that if pain had rhythm, it would coax more honest confessions. He conducted sessions like concerts, paced, musical, and horrific. There's a fresco in a town he worked in that still shows his silhouette. Hunched, claw raised, victim silent. And Geoffroy of Rouen, nicknamed the Gentle Tongue. Ironically, he claimed he never used physical torture, just words. He had a gift, could talk a man into a confession with nothing more than suggestion and silence. No blood, no burns, just slow unravelling. You tried his method once. It worked, but it took 3 days, and you nearly cracked from the silence. Too much quiet, and your mind starts to echo. Then there's Elisabetta the Pale, from a forgotten corner of northern Italy. Allegedly had a collection of musical instruments modified into torture devices. A lute with wires that flayed, a flute that forced screaming through narrowed tubes. Historians still argue whether she existed or was just folklore spun to explain too many missing peasants. You kind of hope she was real. Quirky tidbit. One 15th century torturer in Bohemia demanded to be paid in spices rather than coins. Said the smell of cloves helped him think clearly. His ledger shows he amassed over 50 pounds of nutmeg during his career. Eventually died from it. Accidental poisoning. too much flavour, too little self-control. Of course, the most infamous of them all, Jakob Fleischmann, the butcher of Ulm. No artistry, no nuance, just raw, brutal efficiency. His sessions were short, brutal, and near always fatal. He believed the purpose of torture was not confession, but purging, like scraping mould from bread. He once confessed to having no memory of faces, said everyone looked the same once they were afraid. You read about him in a smuggled document from a scholar who studied punishment systems. You got 3 pages in before you had to put it down. Too much like looking into a warped mirror. Historians debate whether men like Jakob were anomalies, or simply products of their systems. Was he a broken man placed in a terrible role? Or did the role break him? You don't have the luxury of pretending you're different. You're not famous. You haven't invented any instruments. No one will call you the Whisperer or the Lash of the North. But you've seen echoes of those legends in yourself, when the job becomes habit, when empathy fades, when you speak in the same calm voice, whether you're ordering bread or ordering someone's thumbs broken. And sometimes, someone mentions you. You're like the old ones, the guard once said. Methodical. Cold. Sevens. He meant it as a compliment. You pretended to take it that way. The thing is, you've studied those names not for admiration, but for caution. Every time one of them became too good at their work, they were either erased or elevated to myth. Either way, they stopped being people. You're not ready for that. You once wrote down a list of things you would never do. A quiet promise. A line you swore not to cross. No children. No torture without written order. No improvisation with fire. No eye removal. No names for the tools. You've kept most of that list. One time, you were ordered to interrogate a boy. 14. Thin as a stick. Accused of smuggling letters for a rebel group. You asked for written confirmation 3 times. Got it. Each time. You didn't use tools. Just questions. Just tone. And he broke in an hour. But afterward, you scrubbed your hands raw for 2 hours. That's the moment you nearly became one of them, the infamous ones. The ones they warn about. The ones with nicknames and whisper trails that outlive their bodies. You don't want to be a legend. You want to finish your job, collect your coin, and someday fade into a quiet death. No songs. No statues. No drawings of your silhouette on cellar walls. Just a gravestone that says nothing about what you did, only that you once existed. And maybe, just maybe, someone plants rosemary nearby. Not for remembrance, but to keep the stench of history from lingering too long. You hear the first whispers in the market. A delay in bread delivery. A butcher found dead in his cart. A priest preaching louder than usual about wolves in sheepskin. Then a torch goes missing from the guard post. Then 2. Then a well is poisoned. The town is restless. Which means your job is in danger. Not because anyone's coming for you, at least, not yet. But because when things unravel, the people who enforce order get dragged down with it. And you, friend, are a walking symbol of everything the town secretly hates about itself. And when revolts start, symbols burn first. You tighten your routines. Lock your tools in the heavy chest under your bench. Stop taking sessions alone. Always a guard nearby now, whether they're needed or not. You pretend it's protocol. It's really paranoia. And it turns out, you're right to be. The first real sign is the silence. No prisoners. No parchments. No confessions scheduled for 3 days. That's never happened before. You ask around, casually. The scribes shrug. The guards mutter something about council meetings. Even the executioner avoids your gaze. You know what's happening. They're choosing sides. Historians still argue whether torturers were protected or purged during uprisings. Some evidence suggests they were given horses and orders to flee. Others were lynched in town squares, their own tools used against them. You know which version your town is leaning toward. There's a boy, Thomas, a quiet baker's apprentice who used to wave at you before he knew better. You see him in the square now, passing secret notes, speaking in short sentences, always glancing over his shoulder. You recognise that look. That's resistance. That's a powder keg waiting for fire. And then one morning, the fire comes. Literally. It starts at the granary, flames rising against the grey dawn sky. Bells ring. Guards rush. People gather with buckets and shovels, pretending to help. You know better. This isn't an accident. It's a distraction. You run. Not away, just back to your cottage. Grab the sack under the floorboards. Coins. Blade. Bread. The old cross your mother gave you. You wrap it all in a cloth and tie it tight. You don't plan to run, but you plan not to be surprised. Quirky tidbit. In some peasant revolts, torturers were captured and forced to confess their own crimes publicly, on stages, before being executed, sometimes by their own instruments. Poetic justice, they called it. You've pictured that scene too many times. You never thought you'd be afraid of a mob. You've spent years commanding fear. Now, every footstep outside your window sounds like it might be the last one you'll hear. Then the first brick hits. Your front window shatters. You freeze. A second follows, this time with a note attached. Justice is coming. Sevens. You don't sleep that night. The next day, the council sends a message. Not a summons, just a message. They appreciate your service. They hope for continued order. There's no seal, no signature, translation. They can't protect you anymore. The executioner stops by that evening, doesn't say much, offers you a bottle. You don't drink. Just sit on opposite ends of your bench, listening to the town murmur around you like a living thing. Finally, he speaks. You could leave. Sevens. You nod. He stands. But you won't. Sevens. You nod again. Because you know that if you run now, you confirm everything they say about you. That you were never part of the town, just a weapon borrowed by the rich. You decide to stay. But you prepare. You booby-trap your door with a tripwire. Move your tools to the cellar. Board up the back window. You even dig a shallow escape tunnel under your hearthstone just in case. It's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition. You've seen what people do when fear turns to anger. You've been what people do when fear turns to anger. 3 nights later, the mob comes. You hear them before you see them. Boots. Shouting. Metal clanking. They're not chanting your name, but you know the tone. You've caused that tone. You've listened to it from the other side of the door, holding a whip instead of a hammer. Now you're holding a candle. You don't try to reason. You don't shout through the door. You just wait. They bang. Kick. A torch is thrown. The shutters catch fire. You retreat to the cellar, calm despite yourself. You open the trap door. You crawl through mud and spiders and the stink of old soot until you're behind the tannery. You don't run far, just to the edge of the orchard. You watch your cottage burn. No one sees you. And in that moment, for the first time in years, you are truly invisible. It feels like freedom. Or erasure. You're not sure which. When the smoke clears, your name is gone. Not whispered in the market. Not carved into stone. Not even cursed under breath. It's as if you never existed. The townspeople rebuild the square, whitewash the church steps, and pretend your cottage was always a patch of scorched earth. But history's got a longer memory. and it starts rewriting you almost immediately. First come the rumours. They say you were the devil's own hand, that you could tell a man's guilt by the way he blinked, that you wore a necklace of ears, that you boiled heretics in their own bathwater. They say your eyes were red, that your soul escaped out of your mouth when the mob came, that your house screamed as it burned. A lot of things screamed that night, but hey, details blur. One old woman swears she saw you walk through fire unharmed. Another claims she found a bone near the ruins with your initials carved into it. You never marked bones. That's not your style. But no one asks you. They just invent you. Quirky tidbit. Some medieval towns created posthumous confessions for figures they found too unsettling. They'd forge a final admission, stage a trial with a straw dummy, and then condemn the effigy to eternal damnation. It soothed the collective conscience, gave closure to a crowd that didn't know what else to do with its guilt. You're not around to object, but you hear the stories from a distance. You move 2 towns over, change your name, rent a room above a weaver's shop, tell people you're a carpenter, which isn't a complete lie. You still know your way around wooden nails, and you wait, not for anything specific, just to see if the truth dies. It doesn't. Historians still argue whether the town executed you, or whether you vanished before the fire. Some say you drowned trying to cross the river. Others claim you disguised yourself as a monk and now live in a monastery, silent as stone. You're none of those things. You're just tired. You build shelves, fix chairs, sharpen your own blades in the evenings, out of habit more than need. You still flinch when you hear loud knocks at the door. Still sleep with your back to the wall. Still wake up before dawn, ready to face a prisoner who no longer exists. You keep to yourself, until one day a merchant mentions your name. Not your name. The one they gave you. The Rat of St. Olympe. You chuckle into your tea. That was never your nickname. Someone made that up. Probably a scribe trying to sell a story to a noble with a taste for drama. But the merchant swears it's true. Says you flayed men for blinking too slowly. That you laughed while boiling oil hissed. That your tools screamed when they weren't being used. Says you were half ghost, half man, and all evil. You nod along. Ask what happened to this rat. Oh, the merchant says. They burned him. The crowd cheered. 7s. You raise your mug. Good. 7s? Because that version of you? That shadow made from gossip and guilt? He deserves to burn. There are drawings now. Woodcuts passed around in taverns. Always the same image. A figure in a leather hood, gripping a hook in one hand and a Bible in the other. You never used a hook, and the only Bible you touched was the one chained to the chapel wall. But it sells. You've become a villain in bedtime stories. A cautionary tale. Behave, or the rat will come for you. You're the bogeyman now. And that's fine. It means no one looks too closely at the quiet carpenter with the bad knee. Every once in a while, someone knocks at your door with a strange question. Do you know what a heretic's sigh sounds like? 7s. Or 7s. Can you really extract a name with just one nail? 7s. You always smile, shake your head, and say you're just a woodworker. But your eyes give you away. Not because they're red, or glowing, or evil. Just tired. Old. Deep in a way that no apprentice or monk or merchant ever quite matches. That's the real giveaway. The weight behind your gaze. You don't correct the legends. Because what would be the point? You're more useful to the world as a myth. As a warning. As proof that pain has a face and a name, even if it's not really yours anymore. And somewhere, in a dusty archive, a scribe will write, 7s. He was called many things. Monster. Shadow. sin in human skin, but no one knew the truth, and no one ever will. Sevens. That's your legacy, not truth, not fame, just silence, sharpened into a shape that fits neatly into history's mouth. You hear that torture's out of style, not suddenly, not like a law gets passed and the dungeons empty overnight. No, it trickles in, slow as rot, quiet as mould. They start calling it unreliable. Start using words like enlightenment and progress. They wear powdered wigs now, these men of reason, and they wrinkle their noses when you say things like rack or waterboard. Sevens. They don't abolish what you do. They rebrand it. Suddenly, the chamber isn't a chamber anymore. It's a holding room. The tools aren't instruments of confession. They're archival stressors. The chains, behavioural regulators. Even the pain has been demoted. Now it's just coercive persuasion. You're not a torturer. You're an interrogative technician. Sevens. You try not to laugh. Quirky tidbit. In 18th century France, torture was officially outlawed in 1788, just a year before the Revolution. And yet, accounts suggest that in some rural areas, confessions were still extracted the old way, just with the blinds drawn and the language adjusted. So you adapt. You change your titles. You change your tone. You stop using the rack, but you keep the pulley. You remove the thumb screws, but quietly keep the vice behind a cabinet. The Enlightenment loves appearances. As long as you speak softly and serve wine after, no one asks how the prisoner ended up confessing to crimes he didn't know existed. Historians still argue whether the decline in medieval torture was moral or mechanical. Some say society grew more humane. Others say it was just more efficient to bribe, blackmail, or threaten loved ones. Why snap a finger when a signature can be bought with fear? You find that deeply relatable. There was a time when your sessions were loud, screams echoing through stone. Now they're quieter. You don't need blood. You just need to bring the prisoner close to it. Let them imagine the agony. The Enlightenment loves imagination. And paper. So much paper. Stacks of reports. Testimonials. Witnesses. Transcripts. You spend more time with ink than fire these days. You miss the simplicity. You're even called to court once. A demonstration. Not a torture, of course not. But an assessment of the nervous response under duress. They bring in a pickpocket. Tie him lightly to a chair. Ask you to apply. Influence. You barely touch him. Just press your thumb under his jaw, whisper in his ear. He cracks in seconds. The judges clap. One offers you brandy. Another recommends you to the provincial governor. You nod. Smile. Pretend you're proud. But that night, alone, you light a candle and stare at your tools. Not with longing, with confusion. Because if you're no longer a torturer, what are you? You once knew your role. You were the line between order and chaos. You were the hand that turned fear into confession. Now you're a function, a grey shape in an increasingly polite world. Even the prisoners have changed. They don't scream. They negotiate. They ask about legal counsel. One even requested mineral water. You gave him a bucket and told him to enjoy the iron content. Sevens. You're not nostalgic for pain. You're nostalgic for clarity. For a time when everyone knew what you were, feared you openly, when morality wasn't wrapped in powdered lace and legalese. Now they fear you quietly. One official called you a necessary legacy, as if you were a crumbling building too expensive to tear down. They want to keep you just in case the new ways fail. And sometimes they do fail. When a noble's son is kidnapped, when a church relic goes missing, when a diplomat whispers treason in his sleep, suddenly your services are requested. Quietly. Behind doors that stay closed, They say, "We don't want to know what you did. Just bring back a confession." Sevens, you smile, because you never really stopped. You just stopped getting credit. There's a saying among the new clerks: if the truth resists ink, call the man with the gloves. That's you. No one uses your name anymore. You're just a title. A role passed from shadow to shadow. You've trained someone again. This time, they stayed. They wear nice clothes, speak 5 languages, quote philosophers. But when they twist a thumb just right, you see your reflection in their eyes. And that scares you more than anything, because it means torture didn't die. It just evolved. It wears perfume now, says please, but it still knows where to press, still knows how to reduce a man to pieces without drawing blood. You sometimes read the pamphlets. We are better now. Justice without cruelty. No man should suffer to speak. Sevens, you believe none of them, because justice without cruelty is like confession without pressure. Someone, somewhere, is still paying to hear the truth, and someone like you is still making sure it gets spoken. You hear the word again, years later. Sevens, torture. Not whispered anymore, not hidden in scrolls or cloaked in euphemism. It's on lips, in law books, broadcast on something called radio. You're older now, thin hair, stiff knees, hands that tremble slightly if you don't brace them. But when you hear the word, it's like a tuning fork hit bone. It's still here. You're in a different world now, one with trains, factories, cities wrapped in smoke and light. Everything moves faster, but the core of it all hasn't changed. People still lie. Power still fears the truth. And somewhere, someone still believes that pain is the shortest path between silence and confession. They just don't call it torture anymore. Now it's enhanced interrogation. Sevens, pressure scenarios. Sevens, behavioural disincentivization. Sevens, you almost laugh. Quirky tidbit. In the 20th century, governments around the world denied practicing torture while developing entire handbooks on it, some down to the minute, with charts for scream thresholds and recovery times. The language changed. The motives didn't. You sit in a park one afternoon, hands wrapped around a cheap thermos of tea. Nearby, 2 men speak about a prisoner held in detainment. The phrases are familiar, won't cooperate. Sleep cycles disrupted, wants a lawyer. Sevens, you sip your tea. You've heard this song before. Historians still argue whether modern techniques are more humane or just hygienic. Sterile rooms, clinical language, no blood, no broken bones. But psychological damage, that's harder to measure, harder to photograph. You know, you were breaking minds before it had a fancy name. And here's the thing. Sevens, you don't feel vindicated. You feel tired. You thought, maybe, time would bury your methods, replace them with logic, diplomacy, conversation. But no, the rack became a soundproof cell. The thumbscrews became isolation. The iron chair became a spreadsheet, logging every twitch and silence. You once asked a young official, half your age, clean boots, perfect teeth, what he thought of torture. He smiled. We don't need that anymore. We have science. Sevens. Then he described a technique involving cold water, strobe lights, and deprivation. You nodded, said, sounds effective. Sevens. Didn't tell him he'd just described one of your earlier sessions, minus the candles. Because even in this polished, electric world, the game remains the same. Sevens. Make them afraid. Make them doubt. Make them talk. It's just dressed in suits now, operated by committees instead of lone men with calloused hands. You pass by a bookstore and see your face, not your face. Exactly, but the type. Leather apron, hooded shadow, captioned, Instruments of Fear, Medieval Torture and the Birth of Modern Interrogation. 7s. You don't buy it. You don't need to read how the world rewrote you again. You already know the structure. 7s. You are a monster. A product of ignorance. A symbol of an age we grew out of. But the real twist? You're not past. You're prototype. Sometimes you hear people speak with awe. How could they do such things back then? But you've read the footnotes. You've seen the foot switch under the table, the cameras behind the mirror, the sedatives in the drawer labelled optional. 7s. They don't need your iron chair anymore. They've made one out of silence. One prisoner once told you, "At least you had the decency to show me the pain before you gave it to me." He said that through cracked lips and swollen eyes, but his voice had clarity. He was right. Modern pain is slippery, untraceable, clean as a hospital bed, and far more terrifying for it. There are programs now, agencies, black sites, names you don't recognise but instinctively understand. You hear stories, read between headlines. No one's confessing witchcraft anymore, but they're still confessing. Always confessing. With or without truth. And always with help. You're obsolete, they say, but you've never been more relevant. You're just called something else now. Maybe a consultant. Maybe a mistake. Maybe classified. You don't try to explain it to anyone. The world doesn't want to hear that monsters still wear badges. That pain's just been upgraded with new packaging. No one wants to know that the torch you carried never went out. It just changed hands. You're old now. The tools are gone, lost, burned, buried, or locked behind glass in some city museum where children point and giggle at the olden torture man, like you were a fairy tale gone slightly wrong. You don't blame them. You've got fewer teeth, more spots on your skin, a tremor in your hands that won't go away, no matter how still the room is. You can't lift a bucket anymore. You struggle with stairs, but you remember everything. You remember the weight of the rope, the warmth of the coals, the exact sound a wrist makes at the third notch of the crank. You also remember every name, every face, every time someone said, "Please, I didn't do it." 7s. And you remember every time you didn't care. Your cottage now, if you can still call it that, is a single room tucked near the back of a monastery garden. They think you're just a gardener. You play along. You trim hedges, rake leaves, feed the chickens. You even hum sometimes. The monks are kind. They don't ask. But they know. They see the way you freeze when someone cries out in pain. The way you never raise your voice, not even when the younger ones break tools or forget to water the basil. You've made peace with silence. Quirky tidbit. Some retired torturers were quietly absorbed into religious orders, not out of charity, but practicality. Who better to tend a cloister's darkest corners than someone who already knew how to live in shadows? You've stopped calling yourself anything. No name. No title. Just the old man who helps with the beams. And yet, some nights, the wind sounds like breath. Like pleading. Like something beneath the floorboards that's still tied up and waiting. You sit up in bed, breathe, wait for it to pass. It always does. Mostly. Historians still argue about you. About people like you. Were you criminals? Servants? Victims of the system? Enablers of evil? Footnotes in the margins of noble stories? The answer, of course, is yes. You were all of it. And now, you're done. No one knocks at your door. No one slides orders under the sill. The ink on the last confession you signed has long since faded. The rack is rust. The press is dust. And you, well, you're just a man with bad joints and too many memories. The garden gives you peace. You find calm in repetition. Dig, plant, water, wait. There's something soothing in the quiet of growth. Something merciful. No screams. No begging. Just roots reaching toward the dark and calling it home. You sometimes wonder what they'll say when you die. Maybe nothing. Maybe they'll just bury you under the rosemary, near the wall, and forget which corner held your bones. And honestly, that's fine. Because whatever you were, whatever title they gave you, whatever whispered name they used to scare their children into obedience, Sevens, you've lived it, endured it, outlasted it. And now, for the first time, you're just you. No straps, no tools, no roles to play, just a breath, a fading light, and finally, Sevens, a little quiet. The room dims now, and the weight of the story begins to lift. You've walked long corridors and narrow tunnels tonight, through smoke and ash and silence. But here, at the edge of sleep, none of that follows you. Just the hush, just the slow fade of memory curling in like fog. Let your muscles loosen. Let your eyes soften. You're not in a dungeon anymore. You're not sharpening tools or gripping rope. You're warm, in your own room, with the soft hum of whatever keeps you calm. A fan, a breeze, a gentle night outside your window. And maybe you're not a torturer. Maybe you're just someone who needed a story. Something strange, something haunting, something forgotten by most. You can leave the heavy shadows behind now, because the past doesn't follow you. Not here. Here, there are no screams. Only the quiet rhythm of your breath. Only the gentle pulse of your heart. Only the truth that, in the end, stories fade, but you get to rest. You get to sleep. Good night, strange traveller of history. I'll be here next time, with another journey, another life, another whisper in the dark. But for now, close your eyes, let go, and drift. End of script. Sweet dreams.